Other characters. 3 months later. Tuer cursed her life. Being a sex slave for various brothels in the capital made her life hell. She never got a single moment to enjoy herself as she was passed around to be the pleasure toy of various men and occasionally women. Being beaten and abused by both sadistic clients and by her angry handlers simply because she said a word wrong or spoke to begin with. Her autonomy was taken from her in every way possible. She had no say when she could eat, sleep, bathe or do anything that required her to stand up and walk. She just had to sit and wait to be used, and if she wasn't doing that, she's being force-fed drugs. It was a life worth living. In fact, her life was not living at all. The only good thing that came was the monthly cleansing from the temple. Healing magic was a wonderful thing. It could even cure addictions, which was why right now her mind could properly think. The wind blew across her face as she was being taken back to the same place she came from, the brothels. However, this time, her arms and feet weren't bound by chains. Unfortunately for her, this was the norm for her as such. The genius idea of jumping off and running away did not occur. Even if it did, she would be captured again, so it was pointless. So she just sat there until eventually they made it back to their destination. "Get up," a burly man that was her handler said to her and the rest of the slaves next to her. The man seemed quite a bit irritated and upset, yet he didn't lift a finger against them despite not getting up when they were told to. Huh. Confusion struck her as she looked up. Their destination was not the place they had gotten used to, it was something different. Her eyes, much like all the others, turned to look at the man wanting answers. "Welcome ladies, starting today, you'll no longer be working at your usual place." A woman exited the building and said as much. They did not know who she was, but their handler knew and took a bow, which prompted them to do the same. "Madam Hilma, I did not expect you to be here," the man stated, and Hilma could simply look at him, not bothering to answer. "Come this way, girls," she said as she led them toward the building next to the one she came from. The reason Hilma was here was because she was instructed to overlook this whole procedure. As such, all the brothels were instructed to return all the girls that went for a cleansing this month to be brought to her. Tuer and her group entered the building while being led by Hilma. They were all still confused, and Tuer found it strange that no one had yet to lift a finger to slap one of them. However, unlike Tuer, one of the slaves in her group quickly realized that they weren't chained and turned tail and ran away. However, despite this having happened, no one was sent chasing after her. The other sex slaves didn't mimic what they saw, as they believed it wouldn't be pleasant if they were caught, and some twisted way they had gotten used to their current life. They entered the building and were led downstairs, where they entered a large underground filled with fellow sex slaves. Tuer could not help but frantically look around. She didn't know what was going on. As they arrived in the basement, she was given bread and water, and she realized that everyone else was eating something. "Alright, welcome, everyone. As I have stated, starting today you won't be doing your usual work, but you can still choose to. If you want," Hilma stated from atop a podium. There were inaudible murmurs from the former sex slaves, with some looking around confused. It's been 3 months since 8 Fingers was under new management, and so far, things have gone smoothly, and no major losses have happened yet. Thanks to Brain Ungloss and his mercenaries, 8 Fingers managed to squash anyone who tried to encroach in their territory. Having a famous swordsman on your team is a great deterrent. There were new business ventures that promised some money. She had no idea what a maid cafe was, but their trial run a month ago turned in great profits. The peasants paying to experience what it's like to be a noble was something she never would have thought about, and luckily for her, they had plenty of women to work with. You will no longer be forced to do anything. Instead, you can choose from a variety of jobs, and you'll get paid a decent salary. Although she did fear that not having these women work for free would cost a lot of money, unfortunately for Hilma she wasn't a boss anymore, so she could only sigh and hope that this pays off well. "How do I look?" Henry asked her husband as she stood near the open window for better lighting. She wore her usual clothes, however today they were cleaner. Her hair was neatly braided, and the image she trying to present was that of a middle-class city girl rather than a village girl. "Of course, you always look good, Henry," the young pharmacist stated with a blush on his cheeks. Despite having married to her for over a month now, he was still quite shy around her. "Great, let's go then," she said as she grabbed his hand to lead him out the door, exiting their home. They locked it, and they went on their way. "What do you think the Lord wants with you?" she asked. 3 months ago, Carne village, as well as the surrounding lands, became the territory of a newly appointed baron. Of course, the villagers had concerns as they hardly had good experiences with nobles, but by the looks of it the new lord was a pleasant person. The letter said after he wanted to talk to me about potions, so imagine he wants me to make potions for him. Ainz informed. That's amazing. Do you think he'll hire you to make potions for him? Henry asked excitedly. She was a village girl who lived with her poor parents, so financial stability was something she wished for in life. I at least hope so. I heard he was engaged with the princess, so if he hires me, I'll get paid a lot. He said, watching her eyes sparkle in excitement. Ainz was considered one of the best pharmacists in Yggdrassil. The only reason he wasn't working for a noble already was because his grandmother had told him not to, in fear of having his work made exclusive to the noble instead of everyone else. His near-death experience caused him to summon his courage and finally confess his feelings for Henry Emmett, and thus they married, and now as husband he could not help but feel the need to give her everything she wants, hence he was prepared to negotiate with the Lord to the best of his abilities. I heard about that. I also heard that he was knight too. Do you think they made him a baron because they saw how in love they were, but since he wasn't a noble they had to make him a baron? I mean, that's not impossible. They talked as they walked towards the chief's house. Since it's only been 3 months, the Lord has yet to get a proper house. So far the only thing that was built was the walls surrounding the village. For the most part, it seems that the new Lord cares about the safety of the village, so that was a good sign. Their journey wasn't long as they arrived at the chief's house. This would be his first meeting with a proper noble, hopeful his manners will be good enough for the baron. I was going to write a chapter about Arthur fight the dragons, but then I read the wiki and found out that the Frost Dragon Lord is literally occupying the former dwarven capital, so I decided against that. I think it would be good for Arthur to meet with the dwarves first and acquire runic weapons and have a sort of trade relationship with them before going to kill the Frost Dragon Lord at their request. This will also have Arthur be officially recognized as a powerful figure by all the nations. Well, you can forget about this last sentence. 21 comments, 0 vote. Renner's musings. Renner sips her cup of tea that is placed beside her on the desk as she looks over some paperwork. She hummed as she savored its taste. In the 3 months she's been working for her, Edstrom has proven to be quite the brewer of tea on top of being an excellent spy. The woman had a versatile set of skills, and Renner could not help but thank her darling fiancé Arthur for subduing her. After a few more sips, he went back and looked over the papers. It's worth noting that the current chambers that Renner was occupying were not her usual. The room was essentially a bigger and better version of the guest room Arthur previously used, and since now he was a baron he was given a much more lavish room. The rook itself had 3 rooms, a spacious bedroom which Renner has been using since Arthur is currently in Carne Village, a bathroom and a study room which was the one Renner was using now. Looking over the paperwork, she slightly creased her brows as her mind began to think. So far, their takeover of 8 Fingers has been unquestioned, and there have been no issues. What do you think it would take to turn a criminal organization into a legal company? Renner asked, more so out of curiosity rather than an earnest question. Looking for answers, as a former member of 8 Fingers, Edstrom should have an idea on what to do. Change the way the peasants see it. The dark-skinned woman said with a little bit of uncertainty. That's certainly an idea. The princess responded, those were indeed her current plans, however simply changing the perception the peasants have of 8 Fingers will not work at all. After, it's not like she plans to have 8 Fingers stop its criminal dealings, she just plans to control and minimize it. She does want to double profits and find a way to clean the illegal money that is made by 8 Fingers, so having a legal organization that will help would be ideal. They've already made steps towards that with the idea that Arthur proposed about maid cafes, and currently, they've been moving things around and creating space. 8 Fingers had plenty of storage buildings and empty houses that were reserved for emergencies and such, so they should be making legal money starting this month. Once we've established all the necessary maid cafes in the capital, we should have enough space left to rent out to a few merchants and have another source of legal profit. She thought. 8 Fingers already had a few merchants under them, but for this to work, they'll need merchants that are not affiliated with them. Once that is done, they'll already have 2 ways in which they make legal money, meaning they'll rely less and less on illegal means of profit. We'll simply change the name. Milady. It's simple, Edstrom. We just need to change our organization from 8 Fingers to a different name, essentially rebranding. She stumbled upon an idea. Rather than have the perception of 8 Fingers changed, it was better to change its name and have 8 Fingers destroyed, and in its perceived absence a new organization will take its place. However, this time the organization will deal more in legal businesses. Arthur was already in Carne Village, where he said he would find a pharmacist that would help develop a potion to mitigate the addictive effects of the drug Black Dust, if he's able to make the potion. Arthur could just say the potion was made by a new organization that seeks to combat the drug issue in the Re-Estais kingdom, when in actuality, it's just a rebranding of 8 Fingers. The coming war with Baharuth should be a good opportunity to introduce this new organization. She said, paying no attention to Edstrom beside her. Eight Fingers had plenty of weapons as well. Under the guise of this new organization, they could supply the kingdom with weapons and build a sort of reputation before having Eight Fingers destroyed, and have Arthur and herself be the ones that accomplishment is attributed to. Speaking of Arthur, Renner could not help but feel a bit lonely without him. He has been a constant in her life. He never used to be away from her for more than a few days, as such having him be gone from her side for a full week made her feel lonely. We are engaged, so maybe I should take a step forward in our relationship. I'm certain he's been waiting on me, plus I need to do that so Lycius won't get any ideas. She thought to herself. She had figured Lycius's morals would keep her from trying to approach Arthur, however she seems hell-bent on spending as much time with Arthur as she can. She can't allow that vixen to take him from her. A small blush graced her cheeks as her mind wandered towards certain fantasies. A small part of her heart fluttered at such thoughts. Seeing where such thoughts would lead, she shook her head and asked her maid a question to distract herself. "What has my brother been up to, Edstrom?" she asked once she had finished thinking about what needed to be done. Although she could. "Prince Nazzarick or Prince Barbaro? I don't need to know anything about my oldest brother. He's as predictable as they come," she stated and waved her hand dismissively. Her brother was one of those who thought they were the smartest in the room regardless of the situation, and if it turns out he isn't, he will rely on his authority to establish his dominance. She understood him quite clearly. With her having established a third faction within the noble court, that means his chances of taking the throne have diminished, and as a response to that he'll either try to assassinate her or Nazzarick, or he'll try to take the throne by force with the aid of a foreign power. In either case she'll be justified in having him killed. If he tries assassination, she can have him killed under the pretense of self-defense or defense of her brother. In both cases she earns the sympathy of the masses and some of the nobles. If he tries the other option, then he's a traitor and thus can be killed for treason. In either case, she wins. For the most part, Prince Nazzarick is trying to garner favor with the court by accomplishing something noteworthy and get a leg up in the succession. Edstrom informed. While Nazzarick was still somewhat predictable, he was different from Barbaro in the sense that he had someone that had a good head on his shoulders, as such she could predict what he'll do as he can suddenly do something else. A smile graced her beautiful face. "He's feeling threatened by me," she stated with a slight glee in her voice. This was exactly something she has always wanted. To be looked at as more than a pretty face that can be used to gain something, to be seen as a genuine threat that could possibly take the throne from their grasp. "Oh Arthur. You're quite the blessing, aren't you?" She did her best to hide her smile. Edstrom beside her couldn't help but reluctantly agree, although blessing isn't the word she'd use. After all, to her Arthur was a monster that was not to be trifled with. Even though he was not present, Edstrom was keenly aware that if she ran she'd die before the day ends, and she was not willing to risk that, and besides her current job wasn't that bad, at least compared to her former colleagues. Compared to them she can only be thankful. I hope you enjoyed the chapter. It's been a while since Renner got her own chapter, so I thought this was appropriate. Tell me your thoughts on it. 19 comments 0 vote. Lycius's issue. The time of day was noon, however the sun was obscured behind some cloud cover, and there was a cold breeze. On a small dirt road, quite the fancy carriage made its way towards the capital after having departed from Carne village. Within the car was the new Baron. Arthur Pendragon. Seated beside him were the two members of Blue Rose, Evely and Lycius. The three of them were engaged in conversation. Arthur had finished his business in Carne village for the time being. He managed to negotiate with Enfiera and secured him as an employee, having hired the young pharmacist, who would be beneficial to both him as a baron with territory and as one of the leaders of Eight Fingers. It's beneficial to his territory in the sense that he doesn't have to buy potions somewhere else or have to pay an exuberant fee for the temple healer to come into his territory to cure people. That was another thing he wanted to fix when he and Renner took the throne. He needed to stop the monopoly the church had on healers. On a side note, it seems the Magicians Guild and the church are having a feud over the locally, and he used Excalibur on for the first time. He'll have to use that to his advantage in the future. Back on the Carne village issue, he also needed Enfiera to study the drug Black Dust more thoroughly. He wanted to see if the drug could have beneficial effects, and it's possible to make it less addictive. This way, it could be ethical to sell it and maybe rebrand its name to realize it. There was a very fine line between poison and medicine, after all. Maybe he could even have Enfiera create a vaccine for certain diseases, although Arthur's knowledge on stuff like that was shallow, so it may take a while. He appointed Henry Emmett as his representative since he cannot always be there, and he needs someone to rule in his place. The old village chief was apparently not willing to take the position again, so since in the OG she was made chief, he thought why not repeat that. You cannot be serious, Evely stated, questioning the legitimacy of the story Arthur was telling them. I kid you not, Zeus was one hell of a god, him turning into rain is hardly the worst thing he has done to have sex. Arthur said, and Evely could not help but shake her head in disbelief. She wasn't much of a believer in gods and hardly thought about such things, however Lycaeus was different. What kind of god is this Zeus? Isn't he supposed to be a wise god king, looking out for the mortals and ensuring their continued prosperity? Yes, but remember, gods are their own people. Why should they conform to your idea of what a god should be? After all, you aren't a god. Evely countered Lycaeus's statement, and Arthur concurred with her. But they're gods, they have a responsibility to care for mortals and protect them. Lycaeus reasoned. Well, to an extent you're correct, but think of this way, just because your parents have a responsibility to take care of you doesn't mean that they will, and even if they do, they might not do a good job or you might not want them to. Arthur said as much and seemed to enter a state of contemplation before nodding to his words. I suppose you're right, but that still doesn't mean they shouldn't be responsible, especially since they know better and have more power. That's a bit hypocritical, isn't it, Lycaeus? Evely questioned, and Lycaeus understood what she meant. After all, Lycaeus herself ran away from her home to pursue her dream of being an adventurer despite the supposed better judgment of her parents. I personally think it's fine to be a little hypocritical. You can never be perfect besides. In your case, your father still wishes to see you. He does. She asked, turning her head up to look at him. She was certain that her father only let her use the family name because he didn't want to completely disown her, but she was sure he didn't want anything to do with her. Yeah, that's what it seemed like. But I betrayed his expectations and ran away from home without ever talking to him. I acted selfishly and did things for my own self-interest. How can he want to see me after that? She informed, her father had great expectations for her. Asmuth wanted his daughter to become the pillars of the Re-Estais kingdom and help the country, and he did everything to instill good values and morals into her. Yet she threw all that away just to become an adventurer. How could he not be mad at her? Do you hate being an adventurer? He asked. From what she was saying, it seemed like she didn't like the current lifestyle she was living, but of course, he knew that wasn't the case. Of course not. I get to help people and contribute to kingdom's safety, and I have my friends too, and I get to live the life I want for myself, so I don't hate it. It's just I feel bad for betraying my father's expectations. She stated with a downtrodden look on her face. Her voice was subdued, and she felt guilty about the whole thing. That's true, however, that's just how you feel. You don't know if he's actually mad at you for it. Too many people tend to make conclusions about other people without ever actually talking to those people, and that always leads to misunderstandings and sometimes resentment. Never overlook the importance of communication and dialogue. Understanding and acceptance are what ultimately lead to peace. How can he not be? You'll never know unless you speak to him, and besides, even if he is mad at you, I'm here to support you, your friends are here to support, so it's fine, I've got your back. He explained as he patted her back just lightly and gave her a nice smile. Lycaeus could not help but feel a nice warm feeling in her chest as she realized that Arthur was quite the nice guy. She couldn't help but like him more. Thanks, but aren't you my friend, though? Why did you exclude yourself? She asked curiously. Well, I'm just saying I could be more than a friend, he said while giving her a smile, and Lycaeus turned her face away from him, trying to hide her blushing cheeks. I'm right here, you know, Evely stated with a deadpan. Her face wasn't visible, but her tone conveyed it well, and that only further caused Lycaeus to be embarrassed. And? He asked, returning the deadpan back to her. Aren't you literally engaged to Renner? Yes, I am. Arthur did not deny her question, and besides, she couldn't prove anything. Then why are you flirting? Was that flirting? Once again, Evely gave him a deadpan look, however this time, she didn't say anything, but her masked face could clearly convey it. Nobody said anything for a full minute, creating a very awkward atmosphere. At least to Lycaeus it felt that way, so she decided to speak up. You didn't finish she's story, she informed before their conversation got slightly derailed. He was telling them the story about how Zeus impregnated a woman by becoming Golden Rain. Oh right, after that, Arthur continued, and Lycaeus smiled just slightly as she intently listened and enjoyed his company. Thoughts on the chapter? Anything out of place or rushed? What do you think of the interactions? I thought I'd deepen the relationship between Arthur and Lycaeus, and also, the lemon between Arthur and Renner is coming, but I need to make them more intimate first and slowly progressing towards it. 8 chapters ahead on Patreon. Got some other stuff on there too. www.patreon.com Young Master Dio. Obviously no spaces. Shinam_sensational creators thoughts. 15 comments 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. Shinam_sensational. Download app now. Yan element emerges. Arthur stepped foot into the royal castles and slowly made his way towards his designated room. Technically speak, he should have his own house, and the room should be used occasionally. Unfortunately, however, he doesn't have a house yet, so he has to use his designated room. Although he doesn't think it's necessary to build a house outside the castle since he and Renner plan to take the throne and it would be a waste of money. Although it is annoying that I have to go back and forth. He stated with a sigh, as a noble he is required to at least be in his territory for a couple of days a week, so he has to travel to Ainz from Carne village. Lycius and Evely had gotten off the carriage and went into the Adventurers Guild. Arthur did not want to think about it, but he felt as though she was avoiding Renner. The two of them haven't spoken in a good while. He let out another sigh as he continued to walk. He needed to quickly resolve this before any drama ensued, and he hated drama. Although this did make him feel like scum, after all, wanting to have two women as your lovers goes against modern sensibilities. Then again, this is medieval times, concubines are a thing. It should be fine. As he was walking, he heard hurried footsteps coming his way. It took little time before he saw who it was. Renner walked with haste towards him, causing him to raise a brow. She was never the type to be in a hurry. She quickly arrived before him and she gave him a nice and intimate hug. "Welcome back," she said. Her voice sounds much more cheery than she had intended, which surprised her. "You speak as if I've been gone for years, but nonetheless, I'm back," he responded and gently reciprocated the hug. It was a good thing he was not wearing any armor, and her modest breast felt nice against his chest. Surprisingly enough, she had a nice and firm rump. It wasn't the biggest he'd ever seen, but it was modest and firm. Arthur was never the type to have a strong preference about women. A beautiful woman was a beautiful woman, he loved them all the same. "I suppose it's out of the question to ask if you missed me," he said to her as they separated, and he felt like giving her a kiss, so he gave her a peck on her cheek and smiled. He felt it would be inappropriate to outright kiss her on the lips publicly, plus it would be their first kiss. He wanted it to be significant. There was a visible blush on her face despite her neutral expression. It was clear from a glance that the young maiden was elated. "I suppose it is, and even if it wasn't, the answer would be yes. It feels odd not having you by side all the time." Hearing such words caused him to grab her hand and secured it within his own. He couldn't help but think about the lewdness of such an act. The princess found herself unable to hide her elation and decided to turn her head to the side, so he wouldn't see it. However, she also did not let him be the one to make the moves. As such, she intertwined their fingers, locking their hands together. Arthur grinned at her actions. It was certainly a sight. As the two walked in silence, another set of footsteps were heard, and this time, they belonged to two individuals, Prince Barbro and Marquis Bulup. The two were walking in silence as well. However, the moment they saw the other two, Prince Barbro's eyes flashed with an intense anger directed at Arthur, who in turn didn't care. On the other hand, Marquis Bulup halted his steps for a few moments as slight fear creeped in his eyes. He contemplated turning back but quickly decided to continue, and Arthur couldn't help but be intrigued. He really is afraid of me. For the most he knew, if a person was weak enough they could die just from his presence alone, or if they aren't weak but aren't strong enough they could go insane, so he has never used Demon Lord's Hockey at full power. Due to that, rather than go insane or die, Demon Lord's Hockey inflicts a sort of psychological damage. Edstrom could probably run away and Arthur would chase after her, but to her Arthur is something you cannot run away from, so in order to save her life he has to be on his good side, hence why she became his servant. On the other hand, the Marquis only experienced a weaker dose of the Demon Lord's Hockey, and the only side effects was that now Bulup was afraid of Arthur. He probably has nightmares about him too. They all passed each other without talking or offering a single greeting to each other. "Is there anything that happened in the week I was gone?" he asked curiously. "Nothing much has happened. There'll be a meeting tomorrow regarding the coming war with Baharuth, and both of us will need to attend," she informed. As a newly appointed noble, he now gets the benefits of attending all meetings held regarding the future of the kingdom. This would be a first for me. Usually, Renner would not be allowed to attend such meetings. After all, war was a man's game. This was something this she always found to be a bit frustrating in. However, thanks to Lycius's father, she now has her own faction. Since the meeting will be surrounding the subject of which territories will contribute which amount of knights for the war as a faction leader, she is required to be there. "Do you think the kingdom can win the war?" he asked. "No, at least without you, we can't. In the past, we've only managed to stalemate the Empire, and this was because it is not taking the kingdom seriously. She informed. She was keenly aware that Baharuth had more than enough military might to crush the Re-Esti's kingdom, but they held off doing so because the Emperor wanted to play the long game and slow little down the power of the kingdom. Since the wars were yearly, the more knights that are killed, the more the kingdom will be forced to conscript the peasants, and eventually, a revolt will occur, and Baharuth will swoop in and take over. Until recently Renner could only contribute a little, throwing a few suggestions at her father, but unfortunately, the happiness of the nobles mattered more, so he went with whatever strategy the nobles approved of, which was why they never managed to force the Empire to use its full military might. Since the Empire never used its military might to the fullest and the war always ended in a stalemate, the nobles had mistakenly thought the kingdom was equal to the Empire, and that was false. But with you here, our victory is guaranteed. So I'm just a weapon to win a war, is that it? He said jokingly, and feigning a hurt expression on his face. Renner smiled at his act. Gazef is a weapon to win a war. You're far more than just a mere weapon, Arthur, you're my weapon. She said with a smile whilst looking at him. He chuckled at her words, however he saw something in her eyes, a veiled possessiveness. He liked it, however Yandere are only good on paper, not in real life. How do I fix this? He knew Og Renner. She would gladly burn the whole kingdom if it meant getting to be together with her sweet puppy. So far with this one she hasn't displayed too much Yandere behavior, however if he isn't careful Lachias might end up getting poisoned. What's good y'all, hope you're having a lovely day. Any news, anime or TV shows you're watching? How was Deadpool and Wolverine? 24 comments 0 vote. The coming war. The time of day was still relatively early. The sun hadn't set and was only beginning to reach dusk. Even so, despite the early time of day, a rather shady and less than legal deal was taking place within an inconspicuous building near the border that separated the Re-Esti's kingdom and the Baharuth Empire. After their little run-in with the princess and Arthur, the duo of Marquis Bulup and Prince Barbro had left the castle under the guise of getting fresh air from the castle. The two of them were now in a cabin that was not deserving of noble company, a fact Barbro made completely clear from the very beginning but had to accept. Barbro was seated on a chair while the Marquis stood beside him, and in front of them were two people. One of them was Lena's Rockbruise, the only female member of the 4 Imperial Knights of the Empire. She was a beautiful blonde-haired woman with long hair. Part of her face was covered by one long bang, hiding the eye patch on her right eye. Despite half her face being hidden, she was still a captivating woman with fair skin that looked smooth and supple. She had a nice mole on the left side of her face below her lips, and she wore dark brown armor, and with her she carried a spear. Sitting beside her was a decrepit old man with long white hair and a long white beard. The man presented an image of a wise old sage who knew the secrets of the arcane arts. All right then, let's begin. Fluter Paradine spoke, however Barbro frowned. Where is the Emperor? Does he believe himself to be above this meeting? Fluter did not answer but instead looked at the Marquis that stood beside the prince. Your Highness, please understand that 2 figures of importance cannot meet in such unpleasant places, and you cannot be seen meeting with the Emperor. Bulup explained. When he brought the idea to the prince, he had planned on doing this alone and perhaps have Blumrush accompany him, but the prince insisted he wanted to come. Barbro clicked his tongue and remained silent. He was not pleased, as he had hoped that meeting with the Emperor would allow him to negotiate for better benefits and support. Worry not, young prince, I am closest to the Emperor more than anything in the Empire. The Emperor holds my word at high value, so be assured that Emperor will hear of whatever deal you wish to negotiate. Fluter assured the prince, but Barbro simply snorted, completely disregarding the old man's words. We appreciate your words, Lord Fluter Paradine, and we shall endeavor to ensure that you get what you need from us. Fluter nodded to Marquis' words. Truthfully, Jurchiniv wanted nothing to do with this meeting, or rather meeting with treacherous nobles left a bad taste in his mouth. As such, he let Fluter handle this with the added caveat of Fluter negotiate for whatever he wants rather than what the Emperor wants. As you know, Lord Fluter, we came to you in hopes of aid with a problem, that problem being twofold. Bulup said, and Fluter nodded at his words. The old man had an idea of what they might want, but he was unsure why that would be twofold. One part is that the prince requests aid from the Empire in his endeavor to usurp the throne, as it has become apparent to us that he may not be able to claim it in the expected way. Fluter hummed whilst nodding and pretending to be thinking about the matter. So you want forces that will help in a coup, is that it? Fluter bluntly stated, and the Marquis gave him a silent nod. Unlike Jurchiniv, Fluter did not judge them harshly for being traitors. After all, he did not care. However, he does see why Jurchiniv would have such a distaste for nobles of this ilk. Before I tell you my demands, I would like to know what is the other thing you wanted, just to make sure I get the full picture. The other part is entirely irrelevant to this conversation. It is in regards to the swordless swordsman. I'm sure you've heard of him. Indeed, his name comes up frequently amongst the workers and adventurers. I hear his sword is so swift and fast that it looks like never draws if during battle. Fluter confirmed, the fame of the swordless swordsman was something that had reached quite far. Fluter was also quite aware that said swordless swordsman was recently given a noble title. You see, at the moment he is a threat to not only the prince's life but a threat to the whole royal family. No one seems to have noticed, but I have caught a glimpse of his true nature. That man is a demon wearing human skin. Fluter could see the fear within the eyes of the Marquis as he spoke about this individual, and he could not help but have his curiosity piqued. Is that so? Indeed, however, there is no one who is capable of beating him in combat, not Gazef, not Blue Rose. As such, I was hoping that during the war, you could perhaps work to ensure he does return from the battlefield. So want me to kill him because you believe no one else would be capable of doing so? Yes. Fluter gave off another look of deep contemplation. He was only interested in the Re-Esti's kingdom because of the golden light. He wanted to study it and he was certain other mages wanted to do the same, so having sole rights on that place will be ideal for him. Very well, you have yourself a deal. My only demand is that I want a piece of land of my choosing once we've completed our side of the deal. Of course, you have my word as prince that we'll ensure that you get what you deserve. Barbro stated before standing up and offering a handshake to seal the deal. Fluter followed suit, and the two shook hands, reaching an agreement. Next day. Within the throne room, the nobles were gathered to discuss the coming war with the Baharuth Empire. However, despite being here to discuss ways in which to defeat the empire, many of the nobles were simply here for self-interest and simply wanted to push the ideas of their own or the ideas of their faction. If one strategy was the one that helped the kingdom defeat Baharuth, then that victory will be attributed to them and will gain significant reward, so to the nobles of the Re-Esti's kingdom, war was something to gain political powers from. Currently the room was divided into three: Renner's faction, the nobility faction and the royalty faction. Out of the three, the princess's faction was at a disadvantage as it was composed of smaller nobles with little political power. Her major backers were Baron Pendragon and Viscount Ainz, but it was fine. Your Majesty, I propose we have the royal army be stationed on the front lines. As the largest army in the kingdom, it gives us a numerical advantage. Not only that, but the rest of our forces will be on standby waiting to rotate should your army sustain too much damage. A suggestion from Marquis Bulup. At first glance it seems rather reasonable, however it was clear that the Marquis wanted the king's army to sustain damage so that he may use his own force to swoop in and take credit for any possible victory. Majesty, I propose that we create an army made up of all the noble houses, only take about half from each house and have that army be the one who face the Baharuth army and have your army be the one to protect the rear and rotate should the combined force take too much damage. Margrave Yurovana suggested. Yurovana was more concerned about a possible couple, as wartime is usually the prime opportunity for nobles who want the throne to seize the throne while everyone is at the plains. At least by his suggestion the king's army would be the first to respond to such a situation and be able to leave the battlefield without worry of the army not having backup, but his suggestion was met with dissenting opinions. You would dare have His Majesty's army do something so cowardly? Such tactics are beneath His Majesty. Various nobles expressed their opinions, mostly one from the nobility factions. Among the one who thought the titles of duke was too far to reach, they instead wanted more land. As such, saving the king's army when it has taken too much damage will guarantee a reward of land. I would like. Your Majesty, Marquis Bulup's suggestion is the most sensible. Princess Renner's words were drowned out as another noble spoke over her. Of course, he did that intentionally. I would like. Your Majesty, clearly the nobility faction has self-interest in mind with their strategy. Please consider my strategy as I believe it is the better option. Yurovana interrupted Renner this time, causing the princess to frown slightly. The interruption was done on purpose again, she knew why that was. I would like to. Father, consider Margrave Yurovana's proposal, his is the most sensible strategy. Zanak stated, purposefully interrupting his sister, although he much rather hear what she has to say. Unlike most in the room, she was still a rival for the throne and he'd rather she not gain any more achievements. You. Clap. A sudden and loud clap laced with a small amount of Demon Lord's hockey reverberated throughout the room and forced all the nobles to suddenly shut up and quickly turn towards its direction, their bodies becoming stiff all of a sudden and their hearts momentarily gripped by fear. Luckily for them, that sudden fear vanished the moment they became silent and paid attention to the originator of that clap. Gentlemen, the lady wishes to speak. I'd appreciate it if you let her speak. Arthur's voice was calm and collected, yet it carried a menacing that made everyone in the room sweat drop and immediately heed his words. Although it was unfortunate as his interrupted Prince Barbro, who was about to speak, and that interruption only further amplified the prince's dislike for him. Thank you, Arthur, nice to know that someone within this court has some manners. She stated with a smirk on her face. She enjoyed watching Arthur display his power. It made her feel a certain type of way. Father, I have a much better suggestion, so if you'd be willing to hear me, that would be appreciated. She spoke. It was utterly disgusting how everyone seemed to be out for themselves. Perhaps purging the nobles would be a good idea. The empire is doing far better without them. All right, my daughter, please offer your suggestion. The king allows her to speak. Being the only woman in a room filled with men must be difficult, so it's understandable that she has difficulty being heard. While I do believe that the idea of rotating our army whenever one part of it sustains too much damage, I believe you all are focused too much on which army does what. You're looking at this war as something to gain individual achievement from rather than something to collectively win. This is why we've never won and only ever reached a stalemate with Baharuth. Renner stated, this wasn't even a strategy meeting, just a meeting for one side to get the one up on the other. She had always thought they were all incompetent, but it's quite surreal witnessing it. Excuse my rudeness, princess, but I don't believe you know what you are talking about. Over the years we've been slowly whittling away the Empire's forces. Over the years they've been using less and less soldiers in their army, so eventually these wars will end with our victory. Marquis Baloop informed, and Arthur held back his amusement before speaking. Did it ever occur to you all that the Empire might have been doing the same? Did it ever occur to you that Baharuth has been using less and less soldiers to give you a false sense of hope? The fact that you've only ever reached a stalemate with them despite Baharuth using less forces should have indicated to you all that Baharuth was far more powerful than it seems. Arthur stated. Nonsense, if that was the case, they would have crushed us long ago. Regardless of all that, I have a strategy that may help us finally win, so please listen. Renner quickly moved on from that topic. It was pointless trying to change the minds of the delusional. Although her eyes did look toward Marquis Raven, she had pegged him to be much smarter than the rest. Then again, he probably gets shut down whenever he tries to suggest something sensible. After all, my father is quite the coward. She thought before turning her eyes back toward her father and began to detail to everyone her strategy for the war. I wrote this while listening to nerdcore music. It was kinda fun. Sorry for the late chapter, had a block and I didn't want to post here without posting on Patreon. Also check out Shipping Fest Naruto and tell me your thoughts on it. 26 comments, 0 vote. Internal turmoil. A month later. It was an intensely sunny day at the Cat's Plains, with clear skies and practically zero chance of rain. In this wide-spanning field of nothing desert-like bedrock, two armies stood far apart, ready to face each other when commanded. These two armies belonged to the Baharuth Empire and the Re-Estize Kingdom, respectively. It was time for the annual war between the two nations. While these wars were annual, something that happens yearly, they still garnered the attention of many spectators, some hidden, some not, and out of all of them, the slain theocracy was the one most interested in the outcomes of this war. On the side of the Baharuth Empire, a large and luxurious tent was pitched, and inside was the Emperor and his closest confidants. Fluter Paradine and the 4 Imperial Knights. I heard that Brain Ungloss and Gazepstranov would be participating in the battle. It's making me feel excited. Baziwood Peshmal spoke with unconcerned excitement. He was a tall man with a muscular build, long blonde hair tied into a ponytail and blue eyes. So which one of us will be participating this time? He queried, his question directed towards the Emperor. Usually, he wouldn't and would have a stand-in, but he was curious and because he wanted to see how the old man would handle this Arthur Pendragon. You can decide that amongst yourselves, I don't particularly care, as long as you follow the strategy. The Emperor answered. Well, it's obvious I'm participating, so who's joining me? I'd rather not. The Emperor's safety is paramount, so count me out. Baziwood asked, and Nimble answered. Nimble Arkdale Anik was a handsome man with short blonde hair and blue eyes. He had an air of knighthood around, portraying the image of the perfect knight. Count me out too, I don't believe in fighting pointless battles. Lena's also decided not to participate, leaving only one other member, Nazami Anek. He was a man of similar stature to Baziwood, with short gray hair and tan dark skin. He had an X-shaped scar on his chin, and unlike Baziwood, he was calm, composed, and stoic. He gave a nod to Baziwood, agreeing to participate in the war. Well, with that settled, we just have to wait for the signal. Baziwood stated as he turned and exited the tent, followed by Nazami, who gave a bow to the Emperor before leaving. Once the other two were out, Fluter spoke. Your Majesty, once the battle begins, the forces we sent out should be arriving. Good, how many nobles are on his side? I imagine it's a significant amount of the nobility faction. Good, I'd hate for this to be a failure. It successfully will give us a proper foothold in the kingdom. Jurchen informed, and Fluter gave him a nod. The two knights in the room decided not to ask any questions and mind their business. Their emperor was scheming, and it was none of their business. Brain felt uncomfortable being any form of armor. He was the type to fight without any armor on. It gave him a sense of danger and excitement. Unfortunately for him, wearing armor was non-negotiable in this situation. So with the continued feelings of discomfort, Brain unglossed sieves through the large crowd of soldiers that seemed to be engaged in various conversations with their friends. He could not help but notice the rather upbeat atmosphere. From a glance, it seemed like the knights were not here to fight a war, but were just here for a nice sunny getaway. He understood where the atmosphere came from. After all, he and Gazef would be participating in this war. Both of them were quite the legendary figures and were considered amongst the strongest in the kingdom. Brain smiled, feeling a bit proud of himself. It wasn't just his participation that contributed to the light atmosphere in the knights, but Arthur's presence contributed greatly. Brain considered Arthur to be the strongest in the kingdom, and that alone made him relax, and he understood why the knights were the way they were today. The odds were in their favor. Plus the army would be getting supplied weapons and potions by a new organization at a cheaper price than normal, which added to the hopeful atmosphere. Of course, Brain knew this organization was just 8 Fingers that now was under new management. All in all, to the soldiers, everything seemed like it would be alright, so they were hopeful about the war. Brain. Turning his head, he saw Gazef walk towards him. "Oh Gazef, I was looking for you. So how are you feeling?" he curiously asked as Gazef arrived before him. It's worth noting that Gazef was wearing the standard Re-Esti's kingdom armor and was not equipped with the kingdom's treasures. This was a typical annual war, not something that needed him to wear such treasures. "Not any different from yesterday, but I am a little anxious," he said, taking a look at the armor on Brain. Seeing the man wearing armor was very strange. The chief warrior anxious? That's a bad omen. Brain jokes, earning some snorts from the surrounding men. That's a given in war. Is it not, or would you prefer I lie? I suppose not, but watch out, I just might surpass you in this war. This new technique of mine will have you beat," Brain said, with a smile on his face as he grasped his sword. 4 months of training and he finally built back up his confidence. He did not believe he could beat Arthur just yet, but his progress was promising. "Do not speak of victory when the battle has yet to beg, Brain ungloss, and besides, you're not the one with a new technique." Gazef responded and earned some reactions from the nearby men. The conversation between the two only further motivated the soldiers. "Speaking of which, have you seen the new Baron?" "Saw him near the noble's tent. I wanted to talk to him, but he gave off a do not approach kind of aura, so I didn't." He must be preparing himself. This will be his first war on this land. He's probably thinking about his home," Gazef stated, and Brain nodded in understanding. Near the noble's tent, the various nobles were finishing up and finalizing their strategy. Arthur stood just outside the tent with his eyes closed and in deep contemplation. For the most part he was content. 8 Fingers was moving in the direction he wanted. There was a slight lack of funds. It wasn't severe, but it did remind him about going to the Dwarf Kingdom and looting the Frost Dragon Lord. Anyway, 8 Fingers was moving in the right direction right now. They were in the process of rebranding, and after the war, a new organization would be taking 8 Fingers' place. Thanks to Brain's mercenaries group, they had manpower to help Enfire with the production of the potions. The boy has yet to properly begin developing a new kind of potion yet because he's busy making regular potions, but after the war, he should be starting. Everything was generally fine, however the only problem was the war that would probably be starting in a few minutes or hours. He didn't really know. The reason it's a problem is because he has yet to resolve himself for what he is about to do. In the original timeline, Ainz committed a massacre and wiped out 100,000 soldiers, and the reason why he did was because it was a show of power to make his enemy surrender. It was also a way of revealing his existence in the new world. Do I really need to kill thousands just to show off my power? He asked himself. He has already killed before. Crocodile, Zero and Succulent are all people killed by his hand and he did not regret it. However, there was a difference between killing criminals and killing soldiers that simply wished to protect their home country. Another question popped up in his mind, one that reminded him of the power he wielded in his hands. If I go through with this, will I be doing it because there is a legitimate reason for it, or would I be doing it simply because I could? He has already decided that he wishes to take the throne of the Re-Esti's kingdom and will be its king and Renner, his queen. Absolutely wiping out the Baharuth army would fully establish that the kingdom has a powerful weapon at their disposal and deter any attempts to conquer it by the Baharuth Empire. Second, it would put the kingdom's military might on par with the likes of the slain theocracy. When he and Renner eventually take over as rulers, the kingdom will already be a major player within the continent, and both of them would then push it forward to be the most prosperous in the whole continent. He hummed in slight frustration, his brows creased and fist tightened. Being the king of the Re-Estais kingdom and turning it into a powerful kingdom was a goal he set for himself because he didn't want to be directionless in this world. He wanted something to strive for, something to work towards, yet here he was having second thoughts about it. I'm not having second thoughts, I'm just wondering if killing literal thousands is necessary. He whispered to himself. Luckily, he had been emitting a small aura of Demon Lord's Haki, keeping people away from him. He wasn't a psychopath with no morals. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't a villain either, so this was something he had to properly think about. I suppose the real question is, do I really want this? Is the title of king really worth all this? He asked internally. He stood there for a few more seconds, thinking about it before he let out a sigh. This is the goal I wanted. It doesn't matter if the title of king isn't worth all this. I decide if it is or not. Once you set a goal, you see it through and achieve it. Otherwise, why did you set it in the first place? He spoke to himself once more. This time, he opened his eyes and looked at the sky. A king needs not to hesitate when making a decision. The road would not be an easy one. He knew that, and this would be his first hurdle that he needed to overcome. This is something he chose for himself, and he can't backpedal. Otherwise, what kind of king would he be in the long run? I appreciate all of you and thank you for the support.